Hey, welcome to SFFCon, KAFFEEKLATSCH with Anthea Sharp. That would be me. I write USA Today bestselling gamelit and award-winning fantasy, some steampunk, and I play the fiddle. And so down about the third day of a con or so, everyone's gotten a little fried, and I thought it would be fun to just play a couple tunes, talk about music, talk about writing. If you're here, shout out in the comments if you want to ask something or want to know anything about indie publishing or gamelit, lit RPG. That's been a big topic this weekend, and or playing the fiddle. So I am originally classically trained, and then in college I completely jumped the fence and went to fiddling, which kind of mirrors my publishing journey, being traditionally published in historical romance and then jumping the fence to indie in 2011, and been very happy there ever since. So yeah, I guess I thrive in the non-traditional models a little more. So my main love is playing Celtic music. I play Irish fiddle. I'm in a band called Fiddlehead that toured for several years and now is kind of on hiatus a little bit, but a jig is always a good way to start. So this is the swallowtail jig, and if you feel like kicking up your heels, always good. One more time. And yes, I realized you couldn't even really see my left hand. So that's fun. Technical issues. Let's see. Hello, hello, fingers. For those of you who want to play along at home. So yeah, traditional Irish music, even though I don't have barely a smidgen of Irish in my background, more kind of Northern European polyglot and quarter Hungarian. And I've definitely been drawn to some of the Hungarian gypsy music that's out there, which is, aw, thank you, Super Soup Guy. Yes, I have been to Ireland, and there is nothing like going to a place to really get it, So I played Irish music for many years and then finally had a chance to go and live in Dublin in 2008. And go out to the west coast of Ireland, which is really where the old traditions are, in County Clare and Sligo and Donegal, all along there, down to Cork, and study Irish music with some of the masters there. And that was superb. That was just, there's nothing like being in Ireland playing Irish music and, going out to the Cliffs of Moher and then being like, oh, there's a jig called the Cliffs of Moher. And now I've been there, and now I can evoke that sense of majesty. So And so the only disadvantage of being a musician and also being a writer is that it's tough on the body. So you've probably noticed my little wrist brace here, and always trying to stretch and take care of stuff and do things as ergonomically as possible. But one of the fun things about being a musician and a writer is that I can incorporate music, particularly the traditional Irish tunes, into my writing as a fantasy author, and then also as a speculative fiction author. So I mention tunes by name, and I put that sense of musicality a lot into my short stories, particularly that Swallowtail Jig, the first tune I started up with, plays a big role in one of my short stories about a cellist who, when he plays music, the fae folk come to him. He can see them, and he doesn't much like that. And so he makes a bargain, but fae bargains are, you got to be careful with your fae bargains. So so pulling in music is pretty fun. And like I said, also being classically trained, my mom is a symphony musician, interestingly, and so she would drag us along to orchestra rehearsals, and that's found a place in a short story as well. My story, Ice in D minor, which has been published and republished a number of times, most recently in the anthology Fix the World by J. Scott Coatsworthy is the editor of that one, but it also appeared in a Museum of Science Fiction special anthology called Catalyst, Explorers, and Secret Keepers, and that was the opening story, and in an anthology alongside N.K. Jemisin and Jane Yolen. So that was fun. I was happy to get that story about an orchestra at the North Pole out there into the world. So. But in addition to traditional Irish, I also love playing traditional American. There's a really strong connection actually with the tunes, which came over particularly into the Appalachians from Scottish and Irish immigrants, and then sort of morphed and became American and did their own thing. So so just for fun, I think I'll play an old-time American tune too. And old-time American is the precursor of bluegrass. So when people think about American music and bluegrass, then country came onto that. But then there's that earlier roots of old time American music, not only just tunes, but also the song traditions. Like you got the Carter family, people like that who are again early precursors of tradition of what country music has become. So this is a little tune called Cumberland Gap. Me, my wife, and my husband all went down to Cumberland Gap. You're not home when I get back, better get a licking at Cumberland Gap. So that's fun. A lot of the American old time tunes do have like just this little snippet of lyrics that come in and people kind of yell out in the middle of their playing, which I'm more or less successful with, but that can be a lot of fun. So Super Suka, I know you're out there. Nick, I think you're out there. Anybody else? Feel free to chime in with questions in the comments or, requests. Although I'm not particularly good at fiddle karaoke, you never know. Hop in the DeLorean and head back to the early days. Yes, absolutely. Although there are little enclaves of people playing traditional American old time music and traditional Irish music. Definitely Irish. If you are in any town of any decent size, there is probably going to be an Irish session around somewhere, SESSION. And that's a group of musicians getting together in the pub and playing Irish music. And it's not really a performance. Usually people sit around the table and got your pints of Guinness. And that's not just particular to Ireland. There's Irish music sessions all over the world. And it's a really fun way that when I've traveled, I get to go and meet other people and just connect with people I've played in sessions all over the country, all over the world, and it's super fun. What has more / played time? That's actually a really funny question. Probably the fiddle, just because I started when I was like 7, but if you looked at / played on computer games, if we get into like early days, man, Zork, King's Quest, and if you throw in some tabletop, probably more games have been played than fiddle, but quite a hearty amount of both, I would say. The whole 10,000 hours thing, and ironically, probably a little less writing, but it would be good to get the writing going too. So it's funny because I wasn't one of those people that grew up thinking I am going to be a novelist. I want to write books. I remember some early stories, just little scrawls like kids do, like little funny stories when I was like 8 or 9. And then in middle school, I was reading a lot of Anne McCaffrey and just loved her stories. And I didn't know that fan fiction was a thing, but I wrote a couple of kind of, Pern-based little stories. I was just so moved by her world and by her characters. And if we want to talk music and books, the Harper Hall trilogy, which I imprinted on as a kid. So music, a very important part of the world of Pern in terms of the Harper Hall and the way that people not communicate necessarily, but McCaffrey put some music as a very key element in her books, which I loved. Also Mercedes Lackey with her Valdemar world, or the world of Velgarth, which has the bards and bardic magic. And so I can think of some early, particularly fantasy examples, but also science fantasy. So again, McCaffrey, The Ship Who Sang, which is a glorious, beautiful book that I need to go back and reread because it's been a while. Also Crystal Singer, the Kilishandra Ree books about using music to mine crystals and using the power of her voice. I mean, beautiful science fantasy mashup there. But I didn't know that I could be a writer. I would start these sort of fanfic things and get about 2-3 pages in, and then what happens to, I don't know, but I guess I'm not you don't realize that writers don't necessarily spring, fully formed from the head of Zeus and sit down and write a brilliant novel. Like, there's some work involved. And it wasn't until I got pregnant and then had a kid and then had a lot of downtime during feeding sessions, a very leisurely eater, my daughter. And so I'd be sitting there just like, now what? And so I started checking books out of the library and just, reading again. Always read a lot of young adult fantasy and science fiction, and kind of went through a dry spell, had some adventures, and then started reading again very heavily and fell into historical romance, which was quite different from the historical romance of that I remember taking a look at growing up with Barbara Cartland and swooning heroines, and not much agency among the heroines in those books, the big strong guy or the big alpha dominating head of the corporation or whatever, or the Duke sweeps in and saves her. And they were, pretty closed door, most of them. And then in the early 2000s, I discovered historical romance and all of the strong characters and these spicy elements, which this is great. I love these books. And my husband didn't mind that either. So I tore through a whole bunch of romances. And then eventually, as happens, I think, with a lot of authors, is you read a book and it just disappoints all your reader expectations. And you think, I think I could write a better book than that, or I can do that. And so, of course, that happened. I wrote a historical romance. My husband, Lawson, jumped in, and he helped co-write for a couple of years. And we basically put ourselves through a master's class in then how fiction works, what is a narrative drive, how do you create compelling characters, how do you pull in the emotion, what are best practices for dialogue, all of that. And so it took a couple of years of really going to workshop, joined RWA, Romance Writers of America, which at the time was just a wonderful resource for beginning writers, and just started writing up a storm and really studying these craft books. And we ended up rewriting that manuscript probably about 6 or 7 times. And then it ended up finaling in a bunch of contests, getting an agent, and selling to traditional publishing on a 2-book contract. So that was cool. And there are sometimes people say, well, what were the most useful of the research books out there? I think in addition to going to live workshops about the craft of fiction, taking a lot of craft workshops, Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Brown and King, 2nd edition, is still one of my go-to reference books. I keep that on my shelf, very handy. Creating Character Emotions, and Story Genius by Lisa Crone is a more CRON, more recent book out there about the psychology of storytelling and the importance of stories. And that's a wonderful resource. And really, Dwight Swain, Techniques of the Selling Writer, if you want to go way back. And then, I'm certainly not, I'm working on my 17th novel right now, but it's an ever receding horizon in terms of really mastering the craft. You can identify your weaknesses, you work on that, and then there's plenty more weaknesses where that came from. Least favorite part of the writing publishing process. There's a great Dorothy Parker quote that says, "I hate writing, but I loved having written." I love having written. I'm not quite that bad off, but it's not sitting around waiting for the muse to strike you. You've just got to be disciplined. You got to get your butt in the chair. I have a certain word count that I set for myself every day, and I pretty much meet it, but there's days I don't, and then I feel squirrely about that. And but just keeping the word count going even when you're not feeling it, I think is one of the challenging things. And there's places in books that I love. I love starting a book. I love finishing a book. The energy is really there for me at the beginning and the end, and it's the middle that sometimes it's a slog. But the ironic thing is that often that doesn't necessarily show in the final project. Well, it never should. But even when I go back into revision, sometimes I'm like, I remember kind of struggling or pushing somewhere in here, but which I can't, was it this chapter or was that chapter? I can't tell, so the things that you write in flow maybe are a little smoother, but the things that you write just kind of pushing the words out there onto the page, often they're not as dreadful as you thought at first when you go back and revise. And revision is something I used to really not love and have come to really enjoy a lot. And I think that's just because that was something that I had to level up and learn how to master in my writing, is really embracing, not that I couldn't kill my darlings, but just being able to take that scalpel and just shape things, and to realize that revision doesn't have to be complete rewriting. I took some great workshops from Dean Wesley Smith and Chris Rush out at the Oregon coast, really working hard on craft stuff and realizing that a revision can be as simple as realizing you have a drop thread, you need to touch it here, and you need to tie it up there. Like, it doesn't have to be this complete vomiting out of your whole manuscript, and just learning to really step back and with a clear vision, take a look at what you're doing. That said, I have a great editor, content editor. I have a bunch of wonderful sort of alpha beta readers, and I've got a great copy editor. And so it's not all on my shoulders. Even as an indie, I have a really nice, solid team that I've put together after working, this is 2011 I started, so it's been 10 years. In December, it'll be the 10th anniversary of my first Phelan book, The Dark Realm, which was sort of precursor gamelit. And that's kind of amazing. I kind of can't believe it. But things have changed a lot in indie over the last 10 years. And I have friends who are publishing, early on in the digital revolution, which would have been 2009 and then 2010. And I was actually a little late to be a super early adopter, but early enough to remember things like Kobo's Writing Life was a FTP portal that you had to upload Onyx spreadsheets to in order to get your book listed in the Kobo catalog. So like pre-retailer author platforms in a lot of ways, which was pretty funny. Barnes & Noble Press was Nook Press, and they've been through some changes. And of course, Amazon is always with the big enabler of indies, which, love it, hate it. It's been the power. So think of a couple more questions, and I'm going to play a tune. Let's see. I'm going to play a tune. This is by Brendan McGlinchey, fabulous fiddler. And this is one of the tunes that I learned from him in County Clare. There's a big Irish music and dance week-long summer camp called Willie Week, named for Willie Clancy, the Irish piper out there in west of Clare. And so Brendan McGlinchey was one of the instructors, and he taught this tune that he'd written. And this was back in late 90s, but the tune is called Splendid Isolation. And during the last year, I thought, this is good. This is a tune I really got to get back under my fingers, just because we're all in isolation, and why not make it splendid? So Splendid Isolation. This is a real in G minor, so it's got some slightly tricky fingerings. You'll forgive me. Totally spooky little tune. I love it. It's one of those weird twisty ones. Fiddle players can always come up with the best, weirdest tunes, in my opinion. So Super Soup Guy, I've seen you popping into a couple of panels. How has your conference experience been? I'm going to throw that back at you, and then I'll read it into the record here. Nick, how do you build a team when you're getting started? Wow, it's so much easier now. I have to say, back in the early days of indie, you know, finding a good editor, a freelance editor, finding a pro cover designer who understood what had to go into book cover design as opposed to just general graphic design. And the tools that are out there now are just amazing. So, you know, back when you were hand coding your ebook in HTML, that was a lot trickier. There's some great programs out there, everything from Juto, which I started using when that first came out, and now Vellum. Vellum, and then there's a new kid on the block, which someone can type in or remind me, that's just getting started. That's a PC version, because that's the drawback from Vellum. And so the tools are really, really out there now for indie authors, how to track your sales. In the early days, you were spreadsheeting everything on your own into Excel, and the retailer reporting was so not robust. So the other way now, since there are so many people out there, copy editors, beta editors, content editors, graphic designers, just ask. Authors are happy to share, for the most part, who they're using, or to make recommendations. You can just look online, you know, pre-made ebook covers or ebook cover designers, and take a look at their portfolios. You can see who they've designed for, ask for testimonials. And as far as early readers or first readers, that can be tricky, but you want to find someone in your genre. You know, don't necessarily ask your mom to read and tell you how great your book is. That said, if you're like me and you have a super grammatically picky mom, she's one of my final readers. And so she actually gets my book. She's not interested in content editing. She gives me a few pats on the back, but what she's brilliant at is, you forgot to close the quote at the end of that line of dialogue, or you left out the word "the" halfway through this sentence. So so you find your team members, and you know who you can count on. I was in a panel earlier, which was brilliant, the historical perspectives in genre fiction. Just a fantastic panel. If you didn't catch that, with Jonathan Frazee and David Weber, Kevin McLaughlin, Rachel Aukus, that was a great panel. And one of the things people talked about was asking, and you know, asking nicely, but asking within, you know, certain parameters. And that most authors and most subject matter experts are willing to talk to you. They'll give you the time of day. So even if you're just starting out, you know, don't be scared. Ask for recommendations, ask for help. I happen to have in my family circle, I know a third degree black belt, and he helps me a lot with my combat scenes in my fantasy, and then also in my gamelit books. Like, is this really how this would work? You know, and he's like, well, no, because if you're going to drop and roll, then X. And so very good to get your team, whether it's from a production side or from a content side. Everyone mentions how they have assistants. Oh man, I wish I had an assistant. I had an assistant. Then she went to college and said, Mom, I'm too busy. So that was a little frustrating. I want her to be my assistant, but you know, working for your mom, it's not cool. So I'm working on roping my husband into being my assistant. I can afford an assistant, but it's tough. You know, Martha Carr, session before this, did a really great setting yourself up for success kind of talk, which again, highly recommend you go take a look at that if you didn't catch it live. In fact, every single panel and workshop and talk in the whole SFFCon is, you know, available for rewatches, and highly recommend you go and check them all out. It's just amazing. Amy Duboff and crew have put together an incredible conference, and if you love it, you know, watch the videos, share with your friends, spread the word for next year, so that this conference just grows and grows, because it's a pretty splendid thing, and it's not an isolation thing. So I was beta readers. You find people so often, once you get that first book out, you will get reader feedback, and you know, ideally it will be pretty good reader feedback. People say don't read your reviews, but you develop a thick skin, and you also, one of the most important mantras that you can start saying now is, that's not my reader. So when you get that, oh, this was stupid, there was like too much kissing in this book, or this person's obviously never gamed before in their lives, that's not my reader. That's, you know, they didn't connect with my work, they didn't, you know, catch where I was going. Obviously, if all you get are reviews saying this isn't great, then maybe tend to that a little bit, but realize there are people out there who are going to love your work, and those are your readers. Those are the people you want to connect to. Those are the people you want to write for. Keep in mind when you're you know, writing your books and your stories, it's like, what wonderful thing can I put in there? What reader cookie can I give? What candy waiting in the wings for my readers? And so a couple of my best beta readers have actually contacted me and said, hey, I really love your books. I did notice this one thing. Or are you open to getting some feedback on, and often I'll say yes. You want to watch out. There is a little scam going around right now of so-called editors who are like, I read your book, it was terrible, it's full of typos, and if you pay me, I will read it and fix it for you. Like, no, that's not a thing you want to do. But you want to look for those genuine people who connect with your work and maybe have like one or two really good points where you're like, that is absolutely right. Would you be interested in beta reading for me? And readers are usually really thrilled to be able to do that. So, oh, Amy says, started up the anthology series. What kind of themes would you like to explore in the future? Yeah, so I'm, I wouldn't say editor, because it's really more a collective of authors, but we have the Once Upon fairy tale retelling anthology, and we just did the first one for fun. We did Once Upon a Curse, which was dark fairy tale retellings. And it wasn't retellings of dark fairy tales necessarily, but it was, you know, things like Cinderella's a vampire, you know. That wasn't one of the stories, although it maybe should have been. And then that was a huge success. We sold over 10,000 copies, I think, our first 3 weeks in the digital stores, and we said, this was great, let's do another one. So we did Once Upon a Kiss, romantic fairy tale retellings, and so every year the authors within the group, because it's not an open call, it's kind of a closed group that came from a Facebook community of authors who started kicking around these ideas. So we talk about what we want to do next. And actually, Amy, we have a whole bunch of great ideas out there. Our next one has to do with I don't know if I should say this because people steal ideas, but it's like a vampire fairy tale retelling. So we're doing that one. We have the idea of doing one based around seasons. We have one based around musical inspirations, like tunes, songs, ballads, any kind of music. Once Upon a Song, Once Upon a Beast, which is, there's all kinds of possibilities for that, which then people were like, well, we should definitely do Once Upon a Cat, cat-centric fairy tale retelling. So, it's endless. We have years and years of material to keep the Once Upon series of fairy tale anthologies going out there. That said, I've also been an anthologist for some gamelit short stories. There's one called Game On, which is, you can find that on Amazon. Actually, you can find that everywhere. And then my Phelan series, there's Chronicle Worlds Phelan, which was put out by Samuel Peralta and the Future Chronicles. And that was a very fun project. And then that spun off into me running Phelan Tales, which is more spin-off stories set in the world of Phelan, where computer gaming and the realm of fairy kind of break through, and you have some fairies sometimes running around in the real world, a lot of times humans sucked into the game, trapped in the game, kind of a thing. Nick says, I love Martha's quote on getting help. Yeah, they won't write on your tombstone, you did it all, you had no help. Exactly right. Know what your limitations are. I would say, though, with the caveat that no one is going to care as much about your books and your work and your success as you are. So get help with like some of the stupid details and setting up promotions, things like that. But realize that there are things you are going to absolutely have to keep on top of as an author. It's really interesting being hybrid. So one of the things I do is I did an early foray into audiobooks when everyone was saying, oh, audiobooks are going to make tons of money. This is the way to go. And it was not quite as successful as I'd hoped. So I've ended up selling off my audio rights to other publishers. And my most recent series, which is the Darkwood trilogy, it's a Snow White and Rose Red retelling. I sold audio rights to Blackstone, which is a wonderful audiobook publisher. And so the book released May 5th, the first book, White as Frost, which you can find out there now. And it was great. And no audiobook reviews were coming in on Audible. There was like crickets. There was nothing. And early reviews are important. And that's another part of your team that you want to kind of get on board as an indie is an early ARC reader team that will maybe, get that social proof out there that, hey, this is worth taking a look at, get a couple of decent reviews. And I realized that Blackstone had maybe, for whatever reason, hadn't made aggressive use of the audiobook codes that you get from Audible as a publisher that you give out to people to leave reviews. And so now there are a number of reviews on White as Frost because I had to go as the author and say, hey, do you have any codes that I could use to get reviews on my book? So, just a reminder that as an indie, you have to be your own advocate, and you can't necessarily assume that the wheels of publishing are going to always turn in your favor. So that you are going to be the best advocate for your own success, even if you've got a team of people helping you or a publisher behind you. I need some cats. Yes. Fantasy cats. I'm actually looking for the perfect pre-made cover for the Cat Magic book, and I've missed a couple of pre-mades. If you are looking for fantasy and science fiction pre-made covers, there's groups on Facebook that are just artists are doing incredible work for under $300. So you can get amazing covers. So yeah, the first review is, sometimes it can be tough. And then also there's been issues recently of people posting reviews and the reviews never go live, or Amazon pulling reviewer accounts if you are suspected of being a friend of the reviewer. So it's an uphill battle. And as we know, as authors, getting those early reviews can be challenging. You want to read them, you don't, just keep that mantra, not my reader, going. I think it's time for another tune. A sad tune, in honor of all the sad reviews that are out there that we try not to read. This is a little Scottish tune called The Burning of the Piper's Hut. An elegy for all of the bad reviews out there, and burning of the piper's head. We can burn our bad reviews in effigy. Actually, bad reviews are a good thing to have because, again, speaking of social proof, it shows that not everyone is going to love your book. You're not paying for 1 million 5-star reviews to show up on your product page. And so, you know, again, social proof of legitimate authorship, right? And there's the 1-star club. Once you get your first 1-star review, welcome. The door is open. Enter the 1-star club. Another thing about reviews is if you are getting a lot of lower reviews, if you just had a big sale, something like a BookBub sale or a big publishers dropped your price, people are grabbing your book that aren't necessarily your main target audience, which is fine. That shows that your reach is expanding. And within that sort of wider net, you know, I think of it as maybe like a dredge net. You pull it up and you're going to get some like nasty, gross stuff, but you're also going to have some oysters and some pearls and some lobsters in there. And that's what you get when you throw out a bigger net. So, Nick, where can we find a book? Support my work. AntheaSharp.com. You can find a pretty extensive book listing, and I write, as I said, the Phelan series is Gamelit. What if a high-tech computer game opened the doorway to the realm of fairy? And that playing with the idea of the spaces between, which virtual reality is virtual reality. It's almost real world, but it's not quite. And what if that blurred into those sort of liminal spaces where the fairies can step into our world and vice versa? So I play with the trapped in a game trope a little bit, the intrepid band of adventurers fighting to complete their quest objectives, in this case, keeping the fairies from taking over the world. Always a good thing. So that's my Phelan series. I have my Darkwood books, which are set in an enchanted world. And you could say the Phelan books are portal fantasy, and the Darkwood books are also portal fantasy. They're secondary world fantasy, sort of medievalish setting, standard fantasy fare, but in the middle of the enchanted forest is a doorway to another world, which is a big spoiler. Sorry for those of you who haven't yet started the Darkwood books, but you'll figure it out. And those draw very heavily on fairy tale inspiration and the enchanted forests of the Pacific Northwest, where I lived for 32 years, much of that time on 5 acres in a house called Kinder Meadow, a named house, which was kind of like being in Ireland a little, because the houses there are named for the most part, which was fun. So the magical enchanted cedars of the Northwest show up in the Darkwood books. And then I also write steampunk, I call it space punk, Victorian space punk. Alt history. I've written a number of short stories, most of which have been published out, and then I've been put into collections, and Star Compass, which is also available in print, audiobook, and ebook. And that is the idea of what if aliens landed on the lawns of Buckingham Palace in 1850. I figured they'd say, take us to your leader. And 1850, the Queen Victoria was, you know, the Victorians were everywhere. Victoria had outposts where, you know, the sun never sets on the British Empire. In fact, that's the title of the first story, The Sun Never Sets. And so then the aliens say, great, this is the leader. We are interested in actually a super stable Earth culture so that you guys don't become super warlike and come and find us and take us out. And so they clone Queen Victoria, and new clones of Queen Victoria are, every time the first Victoria dies, the next clone is activated. And so there's just this ongoing kind of repressive Victorian sensibility that goes on for thousands of years as the British Galactic Empire expands. And so you have, balls and space flight and Oliver Twist meets Firefly kind of elements. So that's really fun. And I would love to be able to clone myself so that I can write all of these books and series concurrently. So yeah, find me antheasharp.com. You can find me at Amazon. Hit that follow button on Amazon, also on BookBub. You'll be notified when I have sales, like right now. My entire Phaland Omnibus is on sale for 99 cents digitally. And if you're an audiobook fan, you can add in the WhisperSync audio for $7.49. So you can pick up the full package for under $9. That's 54 hours of audio, 6 books, 4 novellas, a couple short stories. So that should keep you busy for a while. And you can also find me on Facebook as Anthea Sharp. If you're interested in the historical romance side of things, Anthea Lawson and anthealawson.com. So I'm going to end up with, I think, another rousing fiddle tune. Let's see, what should we play? This is Camp Meeting on the 4th of July. Oh, thank you so much. So we're going to end up with Camp Meeting on the 4th of July, if you say it the way that that I learned it. Thank you all so much. I've had a great time. Thank you, Amy and crew at SFFCon. And by all means, check out all the pre-recorded sessions, and I'll see you next year.
Hey, if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors.
Our community at KSM might just be what you're looking for
some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.